Okay.
Okay, this is Emmy Thomas, and I'm here with Roadrunner. Roadrunner, what is it like to be you?
Okay. Let's see. Okay. First, okay. What is it like to be me? Okay, you can hear me. Okay. So, what it's like to be me? It's okay. First of all, I'll say that I've never known not being me. Okay, that's a very important. So I would be kind of faking a little bit, kind of masking a little bit if I were to try to say, "Oh, how terrible," I think I have to be kind of, I guess, through experience and through feedback, I realize there are problems, and also, like, I can say that alienation, I call it alienation, that has been just a really strong, um, a really strong quality of my life from very early age. I do have memories. I know several times you've talked about people having memories of being younger than 4 years old or whatever. I can remember being a year and a half,
Mm.
and I can remember very strongly, even at that age, really noticing being sort of separate from everything, kind of alienated. And it, I didn't perceive it necessarily as a terrible problem, but it was something that really struck me. So if it strikes you even at a really young age, I guess you have to say that even though I never knew anything else, it was definitely noticeable as something that didn't feel completely right, And so I think that's important. And it becoming much more kind of reinforced and as kind of troubling, like 4 years old, 5 years old. It wasn't like, I don't think I had extreme alienation, but it was just enough that I could just definitely sense that there was kind of like, it almost like I imagined like a screen, and people were on the other side of the screen, something like that.
Mm.
Um, and I can't remember if it was varying degrees, like, say, maybe less with family members or more with other people. I can't speak to that because I probably didn't even think about that. But I just know that, especially kindergarten, first grade, second grade, it just seemed like I wasn't really fully related, with people. But I wouldn't go to the point to say that I had zero feelings. I wouldn't go to that extent because I have my feelings. I don't know. I think people would perceive me to have maybe kind of blunted feelings or whatever. But and also, circumstances proved that I didn't have really kind of melded feelings with people. Really, I wasn't fully related in a way that I could form what I would call primordial contracts with people. Primordial contract to me is not a contract. The primordial contract is really at a very primordial level where you get into a kind of an understanding with people, and that understanding, because it's at a primordial level, it feels very sacred. And I think that sacredness is kind of like what people might idealize in the idea of a marriage or something.
Mm-hmm.
Even in the Christian religion, they talk about, or the Christian tradition, I think it goes back to the Jewish, the idea of being, we as a people married to God or something, and
Right.
there's even like the Song of Songs, or I don't even know what part of the Bible, where they use the marriage as the wedding, of the wedding to God or something like that. So I think that, the idea of a primordial pacting, or pact or contract, I think that's the idea of, relatedness at its ideal, where you're really kind of blended into understanding, common understanding. And so I think that's maybe where people get that sense of, the treachery of kind of separating from that, or kind of like, the treachery of, kind of derogating that or something. I don't know,
So
so
hold it. So you said you were too alienated to be part of these what did you call them? Primordial contracts?
contract,
Yeah.
primordial bonding, but I think it
Yeah.
really is contractual, because I think the reason I say it's contractual is because I think that in the primordial relations with people, if you are related enough,
Mhm.
I think there's a kind of a vetting, a kind of preliminaries, kind of like the whereas clauses, and just kind of vetting to see, what you're really all about, weaknesses, who you are, maybe vetting for character. And then based on those things, you get to the, wherefore or we're gonna now agree, this is the arrangement, and I think that maybe if you're sufficiently kind of not really relating to people, or maybe you're afraid that you're really not able to really bind with people, there might be kind of like I would call it almost like a primordial aversion to trying to get too bonded, because then you would have to go through all those preliminary, vetting processes, and you would just feel like, I'll either have to fake that, or, but then it becomes a defective contract,
Right.
and so I think that,
Fraudulent. Yeah.
just problems with the contract, and eventually there'll have to be reckonings, and so then you get just into this cycle of, you avoid from the beginning trying to have problems, but then because you avoid from the beginning, you end up with kind of false relatedness, and then there's just constant reckoning,
Hmm.
as the contract proceeds, so it's kind of like, I think that sometimes I think that, if you have issues, I think very smart people very instinctively do not contract on a primordial level if they sense that there's not really a legitimate relatedness. And so I think what happens is that I think that's where meta contracting arises, where you're not going to even pretend to have a true binded, intimate contract, but it's a little more distant. It's still a relationship, and it is a type of contract, but I think it's more of a meta contract. And I think that's where we get like the differing degrees of like kind of emotional quality, where some relatedness is kind of what we might call less emotional, but I'd like to say maybe it's less primordially emotional, and maybe more, maybe more intellectual or something, um but I
Yeah.
think it's totally normal. I think we should maybe even avoid just kind of casually getting into, what I would call understandings with people, where we're sort of, there's a kind of the presumption that this is at a level of intimacy that isn't appropriate. And so I think it is important, to kind of adapt our relations to the actual distance that's appropriate,
Yeah.
and not to look at that distance, whatever the distance is, it's going to be varying depending on who you're relating to, but not to bring like a I would almost say like a value judgment on the level of distance, that somehow the more distant you are, the more suspicious it is, the more there's something wrong with being more, less because I would go with the rule that the more let's say the more primordial the relation, I think the more kind of infantile quality emotions that are involved, which is totally fine. And those things will happen when you're really bound with people that are very related. You have a lot of relatedness, but when there's a kind of more of a difference, I think we have to understand that you're not going to have that so much of a, let's call it I would call primordial infantile. You're not going to have that layer of emotion. So I think it's going to be people might perceive that as more dry, or more kind of uncaring, or less, kind of deliciously sweet, tender, whatever. That's fine, but I don't know that it's important to have a suspicion about that. I just think that, I think if people are really upfront about it, and I think if people know how to meta contract, where you're not engaging in any kind of misrepresentation of the circuit, of the nature of the, the, I don't know how you say, the arrangement, you know what I mean? And also I think it's really important, I think coming from law, we understand contracts mostly as like, well, I'm going to do this, you're going to do that. But I also think there's a concept in law that comes up sometimes, the memorandum of understanding, where it's like, what are the terms that we understand together, and how do we understand those things? So I think that's part of the kind of like, say, relating to people, and so I don't know, I just think it's important to understand that, how would I say, like I've come to a point where I don't necessarily see the distances, like, how would I say, like, I really want to avoid having a suspicion about the level. I think the level of distance is really just a circumstance that, whoever you are, your level of relatedness with people is going to show up, and maybe if you, like, say in my case, like I was always kind of like, for whatever circumstance, I didn't feel totally related to people. And I think maybe my mistake from the very beginning was trying to kind of pretend like I could participate at a level of relatedness that maybe just wasn't true for me. You know what I mean?
I see what you're saying. Yeah, this whole time I was gonna make a joke, be like, of course you're saying this, Roadrunner, because you're alienated from people, and so of course you're gonna advocate that, like, that's not suspicious at all to be so far alienated from the rest of society or whatever. So like, let's this pressure to conform. Let's kind of get back to it because
Okay.
I do think it is a thing, but let's rewind a little bit. And I think, my girlfriend says sometimes that she just never wanted to blend with other people. And I think
Okay.
this is kind of what you're saying when you say that to have this primordial contract with somebody is an obligation. It is a burden. In the same kind of funny way that I think maybe I've mentioned this joke before, and my girlfriend Aria mentions it all the time. Kanye West, he's on a flight while he's asleep, he gets a water bottle from the flight attendant, and he complains about it online on social media and says, "Oh great, now I'm responsible for this water bottle." But it's kind of true. If he didn't want the water bottle, what is he supposed to do now? Drink it? He can't throw it away. It's a water bottle, like he has to do something with it now, right? So I think even like little obligations like that can seem burdensome for people who just don't see the value in the thing. If you don't see the value in the water bottle,
Okay.
then, and the fact that the flight attendant thought that he would necessarily think it, it's just kind of like a misunderstanding. Like she just kind of assumed, oh, this is what I would like, or this is what most people like. But not everybody's most people.
Yeah.
It is a good thing to kind of remember that sometimes when we expect people to engage in certain things, they may see it to varying degrees of having value and to varying degrees of having a burden associated with that particular thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I totally agree about that. And then I think, about these the people who kind of like have a forced intimacy kind of
Mhm.
before it merits it. It's like we're not close enough for this. I think of my dad who loves to talk to strangers.
Oh my God. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Loves
Yeah.
to talk to strangers. I don't know why. He won't talk to us. Like if he goes to a situation in which we are like in line, or like, like maybe a 4th of July picnic where, we're sitting next to strangers, or something in which we're like, the best ones are when you're on a tour with people, like a helicopter tour
Oh
where
my
you all
God.
have to kind of hang out together, go in the shuttle together. He doesn't care about the helicopter. He's all about these like shuttle trips in which people have to like, even to and from the airport, whatever it is, wanting
Yeah.
to just like hold people hostage and talk to strangers, and kind of like, why does he crave that so much? But yeah, I've never really understood it. I sat too one time. I was on one of these tours in front of like two couples from the UK, and they were just complaining about how loud Americans are,
Oh
especially in
my God.
Cancun. And I was like, "Well, Cancun, guys, like you have to understand, Cancun is like the spring break destination.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
people
Mhm.
aren't even being their normal selves in Cancun. Americans, they're just going to
Yeah.
like be really outrageously drunk and whatever. So they'd be
Yeah.
loud no matter what. Ibiza, I'm sure, is probably loud, or whatever
Yeah.
these European destinations are. But like they were just so chummy, these two couples. They were like, and now let's tell us each other about everything in our lives or whatever. Just kind of like this, like, you guys just met each other like 20 minutes ago. Do you really need to engage in all of this kind of intimacy
You
in
know
a
what?
way
That
that to me didn't seem like
maybe that's kind of like
supported?
the Breakfast Club detention scenario. It's kind of like a
Mm,
parenthesis from normal life where we can be like really uninhibited because we know it's a parenthesis and it's not really part of the real world that we have to live in or something.
yeah, I like that. Breakfast Club. What did you call it? Breakfast Club what?
Parenthesis? I
Yeah.
don't know. It's like a
Uh-huh. Love it. But let's get to this last thing you said, which
okay.
I think is like, why does this all matter to a psychopath? Is because since there is kind of a penalty, there is this weird suspicion that's associated with people who do not engage in exactly this way. So if one of these UK couples sat next to me and wanted to talk about Cancun or whatever, would
Okay.
I act the same way? Probably not. And it's not just because I don't share that opinion about Americans in Cancun,
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
or maybe I do share it, but I just, I think of it differently, or I would probably just try to shut the conversation down.
Okay, or like I'll say like I believe my grandmother was a psychopath,
Mm,
and I think she was a very good psychopath in the sense of very very effective because I think she was very somehow was very uninhibited and really using her I'll call it her devices,
Mm.
and she would probably have very artfully just kind of pretended to be agreeing with somebody about something she did not agree with whatsoever, and she was very effective at that, just because I think she just had this idea like, oh yeah, kind of just agreeing with people. And but I could tell, maybe other people couldn't tell, that she didn't agree whatsoever. And it's just kind of just a way to kind of, I don't know how to say. Well, my grandmother was also from the South, and so it's very important to always maintain tremendous politeness, and just.
Right.
But you could tell there was absolutely no agreement whatsoever.
Well, the thing though that's interesting is like in the year of our Lord 2022, like would she be the same? Would she feel that same pressure to conform? And if so, why? Like, why are we requiring of people that they have to lie to our faces in order for us to feel okay? Like, you have to pretend to agree, even though that is like,
I think
whatever
my
you're.
grandmother, my grandmother would have perceived it as her being kind of like winning that situation. You know what
Hmm.
I mean?
But
It's like,
why do you win something? The only reason you win something in that situation is because you do get something from it. Like you
I
do get
think,
smooth
I,
social interactions. You do
I think
get.
yeah, I think my grandmother might, maybe on a deep level, would feel like in the game between people, she was more duping successfully, and therefore in her mind she was winning.
Right.
I don't know. It sounds weird, but I think on a really basic level, I think it's almost that simple.
Yeah, but so this is the funny thing, and maybe this is only funny to listeners who are not psychopathic, but is there a game, like what did you just said, in the game between people? Like what game between people are you referencing?
Well, actually, and I'll be honest, I don't really relate to that so much. Like I consider myself to have, issues that are well within what I would call this, what I think we can agree is the psychopathic spectrum. But I think that for whatever reason, I don't think I really am too dominated by the by the concept of gaming. It may be an element that I'm just not really aware of, but I could see with my grandmother that for some reason that was like a big part of her thing, was that, deep down inside herself, she knew that she was successfully playing a situation, um, even if it wasn't even very meaningful, even if really maybe objectively she wasn't getting anything, but it's just, I don't know. It's just maybe, and I think a lot of the motives, in psychopathy or whatever, I think they're so primordial, so deep in us, that they may be super trivial, but they sort of amount to this constant, sense of prevailing, winning,
Yeah.
kind of controlling, you know. Anyway, but
And I think that's like not unusual, like in normal people either. I one time dated this guy who loved his speed, and I asked him like, why is it, like you're speeding, why be so aggressive while you're driving, like especially on the freeway? And he said it's because he feels like the people are in front of him and he wants to be first. And I was like, well, this is an interstate, It goes on for
I
like.
think a lot of people have that. And I don't
Yeah.
know, like, I don't know what your experience was in Brazil. Maybe there, but if you were living in a city, there was probably so much traffic that probably nobody was moving at all. But
Hmm.
um, I'm not going to assume where you are in Brazil, but in South America, I can tell you, man, people that drive crazy.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, drive crazy. And there doesn't seem to be kind of a logic, although that was his, and good for
Yeah, it's
him for
exactly what you
being
just said. It's exactly what you said.
self-aware. Yeah.
It's exactly what you said. It's just this primordial thing of I'm getting ahead. I mean, it's really, you see, like, I think even in the United States, I've seen it, in certain cities. It's just, there's some cities like Albuquerque and Miami, those two cities. It's like, geez, these people just so impulsive driving. It's like,
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I guess, yeah, I totally believe that your grandmother was great at this. And I think good for your grandmother, because like I'm sure, especially in her generation, especially with her upbringing, these are just my assumptions about her,
okay.
of her growing up in the South, that was the way to do it. It's funny. I was talking to this person recently about like a normal person, like a journalist or something, who was like, yeah, like tell me some of your experiences. And I told her about like basically, I mean, now we have a word for it. I guess it's called quiet quitting. where you like show up to work, but you just do like the absolute bare minimum, so as not to get fired or whatever, like
Yeah.
you just don't sexually harass people, or you keep
Yeah.
showing up,
Yeah.
but you're just like sitting in your chair, like this type of thing. and
Absolutely.
and she was kind of like, well, how is that psychopathic? That's just fighting against the or I'm sorry, fighting against the capitalistic,
Yeah. Yeah.
like hordes that are trying to exploit you in your labor. And I
Yeah.
thought, yeah, that is true. Nowadays, that wouldn't be considered psychopathic. But 2 decades ago, or a decade and a half ago, that was kind of like not normal
Yeah. Yeah.
behavior.
Yeah.
So I
Actually,
can see it. Yeah.
yeah. It's funny that that sense of kind of like I don't know if that's related to, no, actually it's a little bit different, because I know like with my dad sometimes, like I think my dad had some psychopathic quality has some psychopathic qualities. And
And it was his mom that was your grandmother.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but also it's funny because my mom also too. Anyway, um I noticed that my dad occasionally would have these moments that I would call almost like meltdown moments, where they were like these collapse moments where, normally my dad was extremely, well, not extremely, he was a pretty successful person. And really, like an academic, like I would say pretty successful. And he worked a lot. I mean, he worked, really long hours, and, just really dedicated, really reliable, really regular. But like every 4 to 5 months, there would be like a kind of a meltdown kind of thing. And it was almost like this entity took over, And I noticed that one of the qualities of this entity was kind of like dropping and tossing everything. It's kind of like a towel throwing kind of thing. A little bit
Yeah.
related to the idea of, quietly quitting. But I think that, maybe one of the, if there's like a primordial vocabulary of behavior, maybe one of them is just this instinct to just kind of just like collapse everything, just smash everything, just, and I don't mean destroy everything. I mean, just kind of like throw the towel, like screw this, kind of, it's kind of scary when you see it, in somebody who isn't normally like that.
Right. That's
But
interesting.
I kind of related to psychopathy because like my conception of what we call psychopathy is, I think it's a loose term we give to people that have very unintegrated and very kind of ungainly. I'm going to call them, Minecraft. I call them Minecraft. What would be the word? They're kind of like complexes. They're Minecraft complexes. So if they were integrated or more small sized, I think they could actually be used to really season our experience and really kind of, I would call it almost like a cinematography of our experience. So what I'm talking about these Minecraft complexes, which you might call primordial witchcraft, but really what it is it's kind of like the different ways that, for whatever reason, humans have this cluster of like, they're almost like programs that come born into us that automatically know how to like zoom into things or make things seem far away, or make things seem more important or less important, or to disparage them, or to put a curse on them. I think putting a curse on something is kind of an efficient way of kind of tainting something with a very negative connotation, where you see something as being, really despicable or terrible. And so you can see things up close, far away, distancing, emphasizing, it's kind of like lens, it's like lens, like different lenses. And it, I remember watching an interview you gave where you talked about, it's like funhouse mirrors, I think was the phrase you used. And I'm thinking we have these Minecraft complexes that are able to, diminish things, make things more important, make ourselves feel more important, make other things feel. And it's kind of like this lens crafting, if you want to call it, lens crafters, whatever. But it's almost like these complexes. And I think in most normal people, those things get very integrated, and they kind of blend into each other, and they allow for a very kind of a very artful seasoning of our experience. But I think that when those things, are not well integrated, and I'm not sure why they don't get integrated, but I think especially because in all of that, matrix of complexes, I think there are these things called, I do believe there's such a thing as a derealization, depersonalization. I think there's a thing called dissociation. And when those things come together in the right formula, I think we can feel very alienated from our own behavior and
Mm-hmm.
from our own operations. And I think that can give us the illusion that we sort of lack qualities or that we're sort of empty. And I think in reality, it's not that we're lacking stuff. I think it's that we have a lot of stuff that isn't integrated. And I think because they involve a lot of operations of alienation and dissociation, I think they give us the illusion that we're sort of lacking and we're, whatever. And so I think with what we might call psychopathy, I think there's just a lot of dissociation that produces a sense of distancing. And so it's kind of a derealizing, not of ourselves, but of the world around us,
Mm-hmm.
I think in other personality disorders, we ourselves feel derealized, but and who knows how it works out. But I think with psychopathy, it's just kind of a really bad luck cluster where you just end up seeing people not with the full richness and closeness and the right level of importance. I think that maybe accidentally we're kind of putting a curse on the world where we're kind of seeing things as not as important as they really are. And it just, that whole thing, I think, kind of sets it kind of sets an environment where it could be so easy for us to not be as careful and respectful as maybe we could be. And also, but I don't believe that psychopathic behavior derives directly from a lack of relatedness. I think that there also has to be a real failure in what we call the cognitive orientation, like cognitive navigation. Because I think if a person is in a situation where they don't really feel, like emotionally, like primordially emotionally connected, I think at that point you have to ask, well, to what extent is the cognitive navigation compensating? And so I think you have to ask yourselves, for any 10 people that have these alienations, how many of them are spontaneously becoming very curious and navigating scrupulously, with their cognition, doing orbits and soundings, trying to navigate what they're not getting emotionally. And many maybe are either too lazy or they just haven't discovered to really do the cognitive compensation. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think that the psychopathic behavior really comes up when there's actually a lack of cognitive compensation, you know,
I mean,
given
the
the
negative
problem of the.
psychopathic behavior, I think, is what you mean
Yeah,
comes
yeah,
from the
okay,
lack. Yeah.
yeah,
So I
yeah,
I think I agree. I don't want to mischaracterize, so let me kind of like recharacterize.
okay,
So I think what you're saying with this is like, okay, yeah, you're in a situation as a kid in which everybody seems to kind of be naturally doing some connections, social
okay,
connections or social maneuvering, social kind of interacting
okay,
that you're not really able to match. And so, given that kind of lack of your ability to do that, whether it's cognitive or who knows, uh, you start kind of
okay.
cognitively compensating by saying, "Hey, okay, I noticed that that was a weird interaction, and it led to negative social consequences. Like I didn't get invited to
Okay.
sit with these people at lunch." Is that what you're kind of
Yeah, yeah,
saying?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So you didn't get
yeah.
invited to sit with them at lunch. So then you're like,
I
well, let's try to
think.
let's try to figure out how to
Is our.
yeah, the connection is just a little bit bad. Is it you or me?
Yeah, I know, I know, I know, I
It,
know. Well, I don't know which side it is, but yeah, I know. I also noticed that. Yeah,
okay.
connection's
So
a little weird.
yeah, so they want to be invited to sit with these people at lunch or to have at least the option, be able to say
Okay,
no, right? And so then they think, well, let's try to
okay,
figure out why that was an awkward thing. And then I just won't do that in the
okay.
future, or I will just ingratiate myself to them in the future just in case I do an awkward thing, then we can still be friends or whatever. And then people start thinking of that as being cold and calculating behavior. And it is and manipulative because what are you trying to do? You're trying to curry favor with these people just so you'll get that invite for lunch.
Right. Okay, let me see. Let me see about that. Okay. Um, I guess I'm thinking. I guess what I'm saying is I think that if you were to take, like, say, maybe 20 people who have the same kind of sense of alienation from people, I think you're going to see different degrees of compensatory into, cognitive curiosity to try to take extra care to kind of accommodate what they cognitively estimate to be the expectations of other people.
Right.
And also the consequences, so
Yeah.
what I see with kind of like, say, classic psychopathy is a suspicious lack of curiosity to really kind of investigate, to really compensate with the cognitive kind of, not just trying to sit to, I don't know how to say it, not just trying to barely compensate, but just trying to abundantly compensate with a lot of conscientiousness.
Hmm.
And I think that somehow, I think with classic, kind of like the cardboard psychopath, I think what sometimes we're dealing with is, maybe we have to look at suspiciously. We have to look at, maybe there's something going on where the person maybe just doesn't feel like giving too much cognitive effort, and that may come out of what I would suspect would be kind of a little bit of not a very favorable attitude, you know, that may be part of that cluster of complex, what I call, those, I don't know what you call, I call them, Minecraft complexes, that maybe in that case, someone who's come like cardboard psychopath, maybe they're lacking one more step of maybe a little bit of awareness. And I think so. I do think that lack of awareness has to be one of the hallmarks of what I would call, paradigm psychopath, where, and of course I may be wrong, because maybe I'm unfairly thinking that, what should really deserves to be called a psychopath is somebody who really has problem behavior and problem
Right.
like real inner, or let's at least say real interpersonal issues,
Yeah.
you know.
I mean, I think, yeah, because what are real interpersonal issues? But I think let's think of it a little bit like this. So we have, you call them cardboard psychopaths. I think some people call them kind of low functioning psychopaths
Okay,
because,
yeah, I'm sorry,
yeah,
I
or whatever.
apologize.
They're just
Yeah,
unable to, and I think we mean it in the same way as like low functioning autistic. It's just that they have more struggles
okay,
integrating into society
oh yeah.
than
Mhm.
somebody who's high functioning. I think that's all we mean. It's not like you're actually, functioning better. You're just functioning in a way that's harder to integrate into
Okay,
society, right?
okay,
So
yeah,
I can totally see that because you mentioned the word conscientiousness, and that's one thing that I've noticed
okay,
kind of talking to psychopaths who tend to be higher, more lower functioning. And that's
okay,
kind of like conscientiousness is one thing. So your cognitive ability to kind of just keep track of stuff,
okay,
right? Or your desire, cognitive ability and desire mixed with desire to kind of keep track of stuff is
okay,
definitely a factor. I think that people who are misanthropic
okay,
too, they have less of a desire, right? Because they're like, well, people, like, I don't like people. This is something I've heard over and over again. I
okay,
don't like people. I do like animals, or I do
I
like,
understand, I understand.
machines, or I do like other things. So it could be that somebody just doesn't have that interest,
Yeah,
natural interest in people. And so
yeah,
that's why they're lacking the motivation to kind of be, as you say, compensating, cognitively compensating for these things that they lack.
yeah. And I think there's even room for maybe a kind of a third possibility, where you may find maybe a very small percentage of people who really are, who I would say have a misanthropic complex among their complexes,
Mm,
and that somehow they're not like engulfed in that complex, that they kind of perceive it as to be one of a matrix of complexes, and they're not like over engulfed in that one aspect. You see what I mean? And so they have the luxury of having, see, almost realizing it's just a part of them,
okay,
and that they're able to kind of have space to kind of orbit around it, and I think other people are more engulfed
right.
maybe in certain complexes. Yeah. So I mean, I'm a big fan of, maybe, I don't know if psychology is doing this, but I really think that I wish that maybe there could be a psychologist who would maybe, just because you seem to be lacking something in your performance of interrelatedness, doesn't necessarily mean that it derives from lacking something. It may be deriving from an overabundance of things that are not properly integrated,
Yeah.
you know. And so, I think that we have to be real careful. There may be a lot going on. I think there may, and also like what makes these complexes like oversized, where, for example, like, to create the illusion that I have no qualities, there has to be like an exaggeration of my derealization, my, what do you call it, these dissociations, that are creating almost this fragmentation of my complexes, components of my sense of being. And
So,
so like, well, go ahead. Sorry.
uh, I'm not sure I know these words well enough to understand them. Dissociation and derealization.
Well, okay, let's just say if we're looking at like the complexes we have to kind of change the lenses of our experience, like zooming, panning out, making things seem more important, less
Like just,
important,
I think you're saying just the
diminishing.
way that we like understand reality, right? Our
Yeah,
perceptions of reality.
but I specifically believe, and this maybe I should be more specific. I
Yeah.
specifically believe that we have a cluster of like lensing programs, in our I'll call it like our menu of operations or whatever,
Hmm.
that I think really do change and distort perspective, where
Right.
you see things up close, far away. And I think that we do it mentally. So I can have something very close to me, but I can mentally make it seem far away in terms of importance. And I think we do that with people. And I think those are kind of like the mechanisms whereby you can have things like I call them witchcraft operations. And I mean this very seriously, where, like I can sort of operate as though I think a person is not very important. And that can be very important in interpersonal relations. Let's say, let's leave personality disorders out of this, but like in politics and dealing with people, and like say tribal relations, if I need to be dominant, I'm going to have a way of sort of dissing a person or making them feel less than. And these things derive from primordial lens crafting things, where we actually change the size of people, change their importance, kind of lift them up in importance, and or less, or what I'm saying. I think these are like lens operations.
Right.
But I think that
Real quick,
go
I
ahead.
think as an example, I think maybe Trump does this really well,
Of
actually.
course.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Donald Trump, who's like calling people like little
of course.
Marco or whatever. Oh, but what he often does is somebody will say, complain about him, and he'll be like, I don't even know this person, you
Yeah,
know?
exactly. Yeah. So, and actually, it's very interesting because I don't think it's just making people bigger or smaller. I think there's also like tainting people. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
tainting, and also like, oh, do I even know him? Kind of that's what I call dissociation. You see what I mean?
Oh,
Like
okay. But it's an
dissociate.
intentional, for you, dissociation's a lens
Well,
that,
no, I want to take intentionally out of it, because I actually believe I believe that these complexes operate kind of spontaneously,
okay.
and that so if you talk about like the craft, mind craft, I think a lot of it happens very organically, where through the magic, let's say, of having good interpersonal bonds as a young person, those things are kind of integrated and kind of downsized and kind of like adapted and calibrated to reality, so they become tools. And if they're adapted like in a very if they're adapted, like say in a very congruent way, they can become good seasoning for our way of like being persuasive, and our way of relating to people. And sometimes it's very effective when you're talking to someone to properly put things in their place. You know what I mean? And so I think
Absolutely.
these are, yeah. And so I think these are definitely like craft elements from mindcraft. I would call it like mental craft, But I think that when they're not properly integrated, or they're oversized, I think they can become very exaggerated and very unintegrated, and they can lead to really gross alterations in our perception of relatedness. You know what I mean? That's kind of like, I don't hear psychologists speaking in those terms, because I think that we've just assumed that what we could call the deficits, that present in personality disorders come from what we're lacking on the inside, when in reality we may have an overabundance and kind of an over exaggeration of things, including the dissociations and the alienation, whatever, these things that kind of make us feel disconnected, that maybe I've actually kind of speculated that maybe when things get oversized, it may be because there's some kind of like primordial hyper arousal. And maybe that if that hyper arousal is kind of like slowed down, maybe the size of things gets smaller. You know what I mean? So it may be a kind of like a primordial anxiety, but I don't call it anxiety because I don't think we feel it. I think when at a primordial
Mm,
level, I don't think there's any feeling. I think it just comes to us. You know what I mean? So I
yeah.
think that I would call it just hyper arousal. And so like I like
But real
you know,
quick, do you have
go
an
ahead.
example of something that you think maybe as applied specifically to psychopaths, if you have one, in which it's, psychologists or whatever see there being a deficit in psychopaths, but actually you think that it might be there's an overabundance, but there's a, what did you say? It's like uh, not connected. Like it's not,
Yeah,
yeah,
disconnected
integrated.
from lack of integration. Yeah, because
Yeah.
the very elements that make these mind crafts can operate to break them apart. You know what I mean? Like, for example, it's kind of like when you have like a molecule. If you mess with the molecule, like say if you mess with like like the atomic bindings and repulsions, you can make maybe a molecule split apart or something. You know what I mean?
Right.
So like maybe if you set the levels on some of these things, maybe the very depersonalizations and the dissociations that could just season our experience might operate to break apart the whole cluster of elements. You know what I mean? Like these, I don't know, like
Well,
fragment
what
the
would be like a
personality.
concrete example? Like,
Okay,
okay,
I'll
yeah.
try. I'll try to because, like, for example, um, let's say you have somebody who just has a sense that kind of a sense of being empty, and they're not aware of any hostility, let's say, because they don't realize that their capacity to integrate their sense of being hostile has been fragmented out by the let's say the just bad combination of these complexes.
Okay,
And so
real quick, let
okay,
me summarize what I understand. So you're saying that somebody is kind of feeling hostility, but they're not really, because that feeling of hostility is disintegrated.
yeah, I
It's,
wouldn't even
yeah.
call it a feeling of hostility. I want to say it's more of a complex that has a hostile, I don't know how to say, like kind of like a hostile complex.
Okay.
It's not a feeling. I think these are spontaneous things. There's spontaneous complexes, but there could be a complex that has kind of like you called with Trump, kind of diminishing people, demeaning them, and demeaning, making someone less, making someone more tainted. These are very effective. I think we inherit these things. I think these things are inherited behavioral complexes. I think in a healthy person, they become integrated and small sized. But I think in somebody who has, like, say, maybe problems with hyperarousal, I think they're oversized and they can't be integrated, or they kind of fragment out, and they become almost like autonomous separate entities,
Mm,
and we are not connected to them. So, like, for example, I'll tell you my example,
okay.
that I know that I never felt mean towards other kids. I never personally, sometimes I did. When I felt like I was provoked to feel revenge towards someone, I would feel mean towards them. But sometimes I would even have like a best friend, and let's say he had a lizard and I had a lizard. We loved lizards. He had a Noli lizard. We would catch lizards. We grew up in a place where there's lots of lizards. I have my lizard and he loves his lizard, and I feel he's like a great person. And then one day we're going to go play some baseball, and I have my lizard. I brought it to his house, and I'm like, well, why don't I put my lizard in your lizard's cage, and we'll just go play and we'll come back. Well, my lizard was a legless lizard, which looks like a snake. It's like this really larger than his lizard. And then we come back from playing baseball and there's only my lizard, and his lizard's gone,
Oh,
because obviously, it, clearly my lizard ate his lizard, whatever. You
right.
know what I mean? Like, I can't honestly, in the depths of my soul, I can say that I never felt any intent. I never had any, I felt really bad about it, but something deep inside of me kind of wondered if maybe I was even able to think this as a 9-year-old. Maybe I have kind of like a disembodied entity that really was being hostile towards my friend. And that was like a real kind of like a really crude, kind of like a dominance play, with my friend. And really kind of chilling,
Hmm.
especially because I didn't feel it.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And how, I mean, like, how much of you think that that's true, that it really was like, okay, even though you weren't like
I
calculating
get it.
about
I
it,
get
that
it.
it was intentional?
I think you can't really tell from one experience. Like, say, if I was a psychologist, I would say, look, that by itself only will make sense if we look at more patterns in your life, and then we can make more of an informed inference. So that taken by itself, but I think it is psychologically important that I was left with the doubt,
Yeah.
because
Right.
that's telling. It's telling. It's
No, I
not
agree.
dispositive. It's not dispositive, but it's telling.
Yeah.
And so I think from there, when you look at other things that happened in my life, and I'll admit, there are two things in my life that are terribly, that I do feel bad about in my own way, and I want, for the sake of openness to talk about this. But I want to say, first of all, how would I say this? When I was approaching the age of puberty, my only problem wasn't just being alienated from people. I also had a lot of really, really strong insecurities about being a dork, being a nerd, being clearly delayed in puberty, just having this feeling like I couldn't even begin to even try to talk to a girl, like even begin, like I was so gauche and so just how would you say, just like, what's the word, like just I wasn't eligible, in any way to even think of, talking to girls or whatever. And so I didn't have a terrible amount of, sexual, I don't think I was a very, very sexual person, but I think I had enough that it just I felt really kind of like crushed, that I couldn't even begin to participate in trying to, like, say, talk to somebody or anything, and so I was kind of left to just stew in just these longings, knowing, thinking people were attractive or whatever. And even in my own family, like my younger sister and my younger brother, they're very close in age, but they were advancing in puberty before I was. You know what I mean? Like I was behind them, and they were like really popular, and they were just enjoying, just this whole world of just, experimenting with sex, even at a pretty young age. We're talking like, say, 13, 14, 15,
Right.
but they were just really, there was no inhibition, there was no doubt, there was no, they were just welcomed into that world, and just, it was like just like a smorgasbord, and so, like, I mean, I was happy for them, but for some reason, and this is so embarrassing, but and I was ashamed of this even from the beginning, but I can remember feeling so frustrated, and I felt like the only person I could even, begin to try to talk to about, or even try to talk to, was my sister. Okay. And for whatever reason, she was kind of uninhibited, and she was kind of willing to, kind of talk about sex, and then eventually even to kind of like experiment with sex, not to the point of actually having sex, but even to the point of, let's say, touching each other, and I can't explain why she didn't seem terrified of it. And I'm not going to try to say that she's psychopathic. I think that'd be very unfair. But I think that there was something uninhibited. But I think I was the one who was more suffering, in the sense that I was the one who had much more of like a crisis, about, you know, um, there was no legitimate way that I could be sexual. You see what I mean? And so I think she maybe felt sorry for me, like, a little bit. And I think maybe she also enjoyed a place where she didn't have to have the performance anxiety of being with some dude who might really judge her. And I think she almost like felt like, I think she felt with me that it was almost like a safe space, like a Breakfast Club parenthesis, where we could almost like break all the rules and sort of have experimentation that we both knew that we really wanted to use to become just more comfortable in our sexuality, not because we liked each other in that way. I think we actually did respect each other as brother and sister, but I can't explain, and I still can't explain, how we didn't really personally feel it was inappropriate, because I think we both intellectually absolutely knew how inappropriate it was. And so I think cognitively we had sufficient awareness that if I was just maybe a little more conscientious and willing to maybe allow myself to be more frustrated, I could say, I could even tell her, I could even say something like, it's not personal to you, but I mean, I'm so excited to maybe know what it looks like to see a breast, not, it's not about you, what I, and but I, to say something like, it's killing me, but it makes me feel so uncomfortable because you are my sister. And even though maybe I feel like it could happen, I also just want to have that extra conscientiousness that, I would want to go out of my way to protect you because you're my sister, and so I'll at least confess to you how frustrated I feel, but I'm happy to leave it at that because I also want to protect you, so looking back on it, that's what I feel bad about, and also, like, my sister, like we ended up she ended up telling my parents, and both of us ended up, having to kind of pay for that,
Mm.
and so that's how I had my first contact with psychology and stuff like that. But I think if I were to try to kind of integrate that back to the first story, I think, I guess, I'm not going to say that it was so disembodied as the first one, because the first one was really disembodied. It was almost like a really disembodied entity may have been, doing something. In this case, I think it's more like, I don't know how to say it. It's more like there was obviously something disintegrated from me that really wanted something, you know. And when faced with what could really be a conflicting, troublesome thing, whatever the other parts of me that could have kind of processed, the problematic parts of that, they were sufficiently disconnected that they weren't integratedly negotiating that situation. You see what I mean? So maybe the result that came out was the result that maybe my different complexes of operations were not sufficiently coming together to work together to negotiate what was really happening. So I don't think that there was really a full wherewithal to properly negotiate, making a decision. And so I think that's maybe what happens to psychopaths. They feel like things just happen,
Yeah.
you know. And I think in some sense, like I'm a full believer that we should try to engage our wherewithal as much as we can. But I also have to believe that there is a degree to which, when you have like these complexes like sufficiently kind of disconnected, we do not really have 100% wherewithal that other people might have,
Yeah.
and so that lack of wherewithal to me is on the spectrum of lack of sobriety or lack of wherewithal, and so, I know it's troubling because we want to simplify this, and we want, especially in the legal system, we want to condition punishments to match the culpability, and it's very problematic, but I do think that you have to understand, and I can personally attest that, you know, I don't believe that I had really a fully integrated wherewithal, and so it's not really a defense, but I think it's kind of like a diminished capacity kind of discussion.
Yeah. No, I mean, I understand. And from a legal perspective, we know that people under the age of 18 are held to kind of a different understanding of cognitive awareness. So that part, like that, just everybody has, people can have diminished capacities, I guess, for a lot of different reasons, is like a something that everybody should be able to agree with, right? For alcohol or drugs or age
Mhm.
or, special mental circumstances. And so that's kind of like a duh, obvious thing, right?
Yeah.
But I think that people have a hard time with psychopaths' diminished capacity in a way because, yeah, I think it is hard for them to understand it. Like, whereas, and this is something I've kind of mentioned in other videos, whereas, like, for instance, learning in law school that if as long as you just like walked in on your spouse, cheating on you, it was okay to kill them basically.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like everyone's like, we get it.
In the heat of passion.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the heat of passion defense or whatever. And you're like, how is
yeah,
that a defense, to killing people? You
yeah,
went and got the gun, you went and, like there you have no responsibility for what happened there because you were like in the heat of passion or something.
yeah. I
So
mean,
I
yeah,
mean, that struck me as being so crazy as a
of
law
course.
student. I was
Yeah, I
like,
mean,
that is absurd. But
of, yeah.
but then other things strike normal people as crazy, like stuff that we say where it's like, how could you, like that's just so far removed from their experience.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
I get it because it's like, well, we have different experiences.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, I don't. Well, I mean, the best I can say is I've learned to come to terms that I have to take, the community at large. I have to understand. I have to just accept that the general prevailing understanding of the community at large really is the law. On some
Mm-hmm.
basic level, whether you like it or not. I mean, that's kind of like the tyrannical part of law, is that really law at its most basic is just the prevailing understanding of people. So if you really want to change the law, you can artificially change the code, but if you don't change the memorandum of understanding in the prevailing population, you haven't really changed the law.
Yeah,
You know what
you're
I
gonna get
mean?
jury nullification, all this stuff. Yeah, I was just explaining this to a friend because maybe you heard about this. there was like a former SDSU football player. He's a punter who now plays for, I don't remember. And then they just released him because he was accused of definitely statutory rape. I think he admitted to, and
Yeah.
then also gang rape of this particular girl who showed up at like a college party and had sex with a dude for sure, and she was underage. And then, allegedly, she alleges that it was also a gang rape situation, right? And I kind of said, like, if even though he's admitted to statutory rape, if she, was like, because he was like, well, it's if she's a day under 18, then it's statutory rape no matter what. And I'm
Hmm.
like, yeah, that's what the code says, that's what the statute says. But
Hmm.
like, would a jury actually convict this guy if that were
Yeah,
true? You know,
absolutely. Yeah.
there's like, so it's what you say, you can change the law, but the jury's still not going to follow the law if it so widely departs from their own kind of
Yeah,
understanding of what is
absolutely.
right or wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that the way that I apply that is that, like I work in the law, like I really do. I work a lot. I mean, like I lost my license. I let my license lapse, but I work a lot in legal writing, and I work with a lawyer, and I do appeals, and we do criminal law, we do civil law, and we write a lot of appeals. We do a lot of motions. We do a lot of hard cases, and I have to say that for me, what we do in the kind of like the formal legal world is very artificial. It's very artificial because we're just operating on what the law says. We're also trying to game a little bit how we think the judges might be, or whatever. Um, but it's not lost on me that the real law is something else.
Yeah.
And so I think, like, if there's any effort or campaign or proposal, that maybe we sort of like destigmatize personality disorders. And I don't want to just isolate psychopathy. I think personality disorders in general are seen as kind of like, it's kind of weird because I think with the way we define them, it's kind of almost implicit that you're sort of like, you didn't choose to have the disorder. Yeah, and
Right.
I want to be so careful when I say disorder. Let's say condition. You,
Mm.
you didn't choose to have the condition, and that the condition does affect your behavior. And yet somehow, just because you might happen to know that what you're doing is wrong, that just ends the discussion. You see what I
Right.
mean? Like, because I think we have this idea that if you just know that something's wrong, you're deemed to have full wherewithal, when in reality you might not have had full wherewithal.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? And
Yeah.
so I don't know. And I'm not even sure that's the thing, because I'm sure even, I don't know. I think there's other situations where, like even in, I don't know. I think there are other areas in the law where you can technically have known something was wrong, but you're still given a lot more leeway than if you had a, let's say the excuse of a personality disorder. But um, I don't know. So, to me, it's almost like a social policy that we're just not going to give a lot of leeway to. It's almost like a social policy that, we're just going to kind of barely tolerate personality disorders, and they really are kind of like a trash class of people.
Yes, yes. So as part of like my continuing legal education classes, I took this one about criminal law. That there, I forget what the word is, like basic diversion or something, that you can, in
Yeah.
certain instances, if
Yeah.
you're accused of a crime, certain jurisdictions will allow you to, instead of going to prison, go get help, for whatever the thing is,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And so alcoholism's obviously one of them.
Yeah.
Like there are
Hmm.
all these conditions that you can,
Of
instead of
course.
going to prison, get help. And then
Yeah.
the exclusions there are three exclusions. Can you guess? We're in California.
What are they? I'd like to know. I'm sorry. I really would like
Yeah.
to know.
One
What
of
are they?
them, obviously pedophilia. They're like,
Okay.
nope,
Yeah.
you're a
Yeah.
trash person.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The second
Yeah.
one is shocking to me because there is like well established evidence that they can be treated. I think it's, what is it, dialectic
Oh,
therapy?
borderline. Borderline.
Borderline's
Okay.
also excluded. Like
Oh
if
my
you're
God.
borderline, you're going to prison. Doesn't matter that
Yeah.
there's a well established treatment for you. And then
Yeah.
the third one
Yeah.
obviously is psychopaths, those rat
Yeah.
bastards.
Well, you know what? And frankly, I am not afraid to allow, maybe I think I think psychology itself has something to do with this, because psychology, I think, is kind of fed to the public instead of really describing, really being more scrupulous and trying to describe what is the situation that makes personality disorders. I think psychology is almost, I think, really suspiciously very like, just very kind of I would say kind of just, I think it's very suspicious how sorry, what's the word, the personality disorders are kind of caricatures. They're kind of like
Yeah, the
they're
word choices that they use are just like, if you wanted to kind of demonize something, these are the words you'd
yeah,
use.
it's just, but also I think, like, why is it that personality disorders are kind of they're just like, they're stereotypes, you know what I mean? There's
Mhm.
something, when you're getting into stereotyping people, that cannot be what I would call, like really good faith thinking.
Yeah.
There's something in
Or
there.
even objective thinking,
Yeah, so I don't know, it's like, I have my ideas, different ways that psychology is contaminated, like everything is contaminated, but I just feel really bad, I don't know, I just, and it's hard to explain, because I think most psychology, and that's the problem with psychology. So I think psychiatry and psychology itself, I think that whole world, they personally feel like all they do is care about people, but I think that might be the convenient veneer that makes, I don't know, it's kind of like the mask of psychology, that
Mm,
we just care.
yeah.
But I think underneath there may be maybe some kind of like nasty complexes, going
No,
on.
no, I totally agree. And this is something that, there's the Discord or whatever that some psychopath or other personality disordered people participate in. And it's not unusual to see them say that they got ghosted by their therapist, and I think it's because they're even in the psychological world. And that there's actually a good, I think it's Ariel Baskin Summers, maybe like a Slate article or something from April, I think talks
Yeah.
about this, how the stigma of personality disorders and specifically of psychopaths.
Mhm.
So this would be April 2022, I think. Uh, she's talking about like Hollywood stereotypes and how they affect not just like the general public's perception of psychopaths, but also affect the psychologist's perception that there
Mhm.
is a stigma that she identifies such that they don't get the treatment. They're, falsely they believe that they can't be treated,
Mhm.
falsely they believe all sorts of different things about it, where it's
Mhm.
just like, how can the profession, like, I don't know if this is true of psychology in general and
Mhm.
mental health professionals, but health
Mhm.
professionals, physical health
Mhm.
professionals
Yeah.
have like all of these ethical codes. Like this is something that I often kind of discuss with like my paralegal students,
Okay.
is that, like, because they're always like lawyers,
Uh-huh.
are liars or whatever, or lawyers shouldn't represent bad people or whatever,
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so like this, and I got this because my hairstylist at the time, so however many years ago this is, when Hillary Clinton was running for president, right? Is it
Okay.
2016, I think?
Yeah. I remember. I
Seems
remember.
like a lifetime ago,
I
right?
know.
But
God.
she was like, yeah, I really like Hillary Clinton, but it just really bothers me that as a young prosecutor, she represented people that she knew were bad or something. And I was like, how is this a thing? Like, this is the one reason. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's all sorts of reasons why you cannot like somebody, but it just struck me as being a wrong reason to like someone, because why impose that obligation on a profession? Like, if somebody comes into an ER with like three
Mhm.
gunshot wounds, does
Uh-huh.
the doctor be like, hold it first before I operate on them? Was this person the antagonist? And
Yeah.
is this person a drug dealer? Is this
Yeah.
person like, why was this person shot? Let me first figure out whether they're a bad guy, because I
Yeah.
don't want to, you know, practice my profession on a bad guy. But they expect that
Yeah.
out of lawyers. But the weirdest thing is like psychologists almost feel like, it feels like they have like taken upon themselves that thing where they're like, we will not treat bad guys.
Yeah.
Like,
Or also, like, I have to make a comment, because like, it's funny because like, I don't even know, like, personally, like take Dr. Phil, for example.
mhm.
Okay. I don't
A
know if
doctor.
Well, okay, but let's just say outside of the context of his show, like say if
uh,
he would just met you like just randomly outside of the context of his show, I wonder if he would treat you the same as he treated you on camera. You know what I
no,
mean?
absolutely not. Because, off camera, he was like, hey, who's your publicist? And like, that's
Oh,
great that you wrote a book.
schmoozing with you. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, he's like really whatever charming and like normal to me. So he's, but I don't think most psychologists are that way. I don't think they're like two-faced. He's a
Yeah, yeah,
unique
yeah,
one
yeah,
because of his TV show,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and, but I think that this idea of, something I think that we talked about before we started recording is that like the psychological world is associated a little bit with kind of
Oh yeah,
left
absolutely.
politics, yeah,
Uh-huh.
left thinking.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what you said about like we care, that's what we do, we care or something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But just kind of the,
Mm-hmm.
one thing that when the book came out, I didn't put all my eggs in one basket about trying to be a law professor. I was actually affiliated with three different law schools at the
Okay, okay, okay,
time.
okay.
Yeah, and I thought one of them's going to be like, we're not going to violate the Americans with Disability Act. We're going to maintain hiring this individual despite this mental health disorder. We're
Yeah.
not going to fire her because she has a mental health disorder, what I think is a clear violation of the Americans with Disability
Did
Act,
you
right?
did you talk to an attorney about? I mean,
Oh
I
yeah,
that
I
might.
did for one of them, and that person was
Okay.
like, "Well, you were on just like a 1 year contract
Oh
for this
God,
particular law
that's
school."
yeah.
Yeah, and
Damn.
for the other law
Yeah.
school, you technically, already said you're moving on to the third law school,
Oh my
right?
God.
So it was a little bit tricky, but there was at least a threat of a lawsuit for one of them because that was the clearest, and
Yeah.
there, it was resolved.
Oh
The
my
amount
God.
of
Okay. Okay.
litigation, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had major because I heard even yesterday. I think it was on yesterday's video. You
Hmm.
kind of went into a little bit of detail about how they even put like what almost looked like a restraining order.
Yes,
Something.
well, they didn't actually get a restraining order. That's why it wasn't
Oh,
lawful for them to
it
do.
was an agreed
They
settlement.
just said it wasn't agreed. No, that
Oh,
was not
okay.
a settlement. They were just like, you can't come within, this 1,000 yards, 1,000 meters, like a kilometer of the
Okay.
campus. And I
Okay.
was like, this is unlawful. And it's
Yeah. I mean,
also
my
discriminatory.
like all my instincts told me that there has to be some. Yeah. I don't know.
And it's
It
a
is.
law school that's
Oh
doing
yeah.
it. That was what was
Yeah.
so crazy about it. And but I
Yeah.
thought, this school, because it's in San Francisco, this school, these people are left leaning to the nth degree. They're probably
Oh.
San Franciscan law professors, right?
Yeah.
They're probably way left leaning. I thought, they'll be probably the most kind of understanding of this type of thing. And the answer is no, because there's
Mhm,
a
mhm.
competing interest I've kind of noticed, maybe with some people who identify themselves as being leftist,
Okay.
is that they also they're baddies. There's certain baddies, and like left is good. Left is
Oh
morally
yeah. No,
right.
no.
Yeah.
There.
So we can't
That's
we can't
why.
include the
Yeah.
morally bad in
Yeah.
this. We have
I
to
don't
protect.
think. Yeah, I don't think it's very useful to distinguish much, like an ideological movement from a religion. And I think that
Mm,
one of the problems you see with religions is kind of this really exaggerated, like kind of an exaggerated piousness, or kind of like uh, I don't know what the word is, kind of like sanctimoniousness or whatever. But to the extent it becomes exaggerated, it's almost like a narcissistic pattern where, to the extent you exaggerate your false self as being superior, to the extent of the exaggeration is the extent of kind of like this really sharp kind of like revulsion, at the opposite or something. So
yeah.
it's to me, it's there's nothing authentic about it. There's something very, very telling about that. But on the other hand, I have to be honest. Like, I have to say that even me, and I believe I have psychopathic, at least, I would say at least, psychopathic, what do you call it? Like, I have, I don't know what the word is. I don't know, like processes. I don't know, whatever. But there is, I do have, I think I've demonstrated, that I have those things. But I think that even me, and even though I have identified with people that are psychopathic, I think that I still personally also am scared of psychopaths. And I think
Mm,
that may be because that's so effective. The taboo, the curse, call
mm,
it,
mhm.
and there may be some reason for it that maybe I just need to be more creative to see, to be fair, maybe it's a sad fact. But the law is the law, and the law is not the law of another planet. The law is not the law of my imagination. The law is the law of what prevailing understanding, and maybe there's a prevailing understanding that, however understandable it may be, when a person gets to the point where they're kind of seeming to operate in understanding, but they're really kind of fraudulently operating, that is such a derogation, of our basic, understandings, that it's just kind of, I don't know how to say it, it's just offensive,
Yeah.
and maybe also, like, maybe we have at a very intimate level, we have an expectation that people will be, to some degree, very kind of like honest in dealings, and that when there's a sufficient level of a break where someone is kind of broken off from really being honest in dealings, that creates a lot of distrust, and you almost feel like you can't trust that person, but at such a deep level that it just, well, bottom line, we can pretend all we want to be open-minded, that we've never been more humanitarian. We just want all the homeless people to have houses. And yet there is still trash, and there
Yeah.
is trash, and they are trash, and
Yeah.
it's almost like it's heavily punctuated. And, it's like a relish, it's like, I don't know, I don't know how to explain it, but I think I have to admit that maybe that's just a product of the law as it is, the law as it is.
Hmm.
And so if there was an idea maybe to try to make the law more understanding, I think that would require just a tremendous amount of, I don't know how to say, just very careful about getting the message to the right people and just having it percolate properly, but it have to be very effective. And so far, I see little examples, like that one neuroscientist, I can't remember his name, who did a brain scan on himself,
Yeah.
and he,
James Fallon. Yeah.
okay, yeah, but I think, I don't know how to say it, I think, gosh, my immediate impression is like a drop in the bucket. It's like there has to be a lot more, and it has to be pretty effective, because I think you have to overcome this tremendous presumption of untrustworthiness. And also, I have to be honest, because I do think, what are the real breakdowns between relatively functioning and really poorly functioning, people that have these issues, and so if there are enough people that really are essentially, I hate to say unredeemable, um, maybe just as a matter of social efficiency, it just doesn't make sense to invest so much energy in trying to have it, change the attitude.
Yeah. So two kind of things on this about like the law and what we can do. And remind me to get back to this one because I'll remember this one better. So
Okay.
remind me to get back to Psychopathy is that nonprofit. But the second one is I just finished watching the season finale of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, right? And there's, I mean, you don't need to know, this is not a spoiler alert, but just one of the characters is Lenny Bruce, I guess the
Okay.
comic, who was a real life comic, who
Okay.
was frequently jailed for obscenity charges, right?
Okay.
So was like a big kind of champion of free speech and stuff, but this like tension, I guess in the 60s, I'm not even sure what decade,
Okay.
of free speech over kind of these rules against obscenity, right? And then he was kind of talking to another character and was saying like, you know, the perception just matters so much of things. Like when people see me get popped, he said, arrested for obscenity and they see me
Yeah,
in jail, they
of
think, yeah,
course.
he belongs there. And if people
Okay.
see me hobnobbing instead with Tony Bennett, they think, yeah, he belongs there. And I think it is true. Like there is something about perception where people are like, it's these people are trash as long as that's the standard kind of thinking. And this
Yeah.
is, I hope, not going to get me canceled. Fingers crossed. But
Yeah.
like the perception of transgender people, even like a decade ago,
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
kind of like trash, you know, like who
Yeah.
are these people? You know, we don't understand them.
Yeah.
We don't care to understand them. And
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
it's just kind of been like a big flip where like
Too
people are,
freakish. They're too freakish. They're
yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
freakish that every reason is broken. It's like it cracks the egg, you know. It's like,
Right.
you know.
And now it's like you say something that, you know, suggests that maybe there's a distinction between cisgender women and transgender women that can get you really canceled, you know? Like, and so that kind of swing has happened in the past 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the Psychopathy is people, you know, I'm on their board of
Okay.
advisors,
Okay.
and I really, you know, like I think they're the only people who are doing
Okay.
anything
Okay.
positive for people who have psychopathy, or you know somebody, you know, their parents or family members or whatever, you know. So for a lot of reasons, I want to support them, and I think they're doing great
Okay.
work, and they
Yeah.
kind of want to do, is my impression, at least, I don't want to mischaracterize them, they want to kind of do for psychopathy like what I think it's Autism Speaks did for
Okay.
autism, where it
Okay.
was like
Okay.
in the 90s, you know, if you're
Okay.
autistic, then that was kind of like, wow, you know,
Yeah.
like you're now kind of a trash person because we just don't know how to deal with you,
Yeah.
you know, and you're never going to be integrated in society. People are never going to understand you. They're never going to accept you. And that's really
Yeah.
what it was in the 90s,
Yeah.
until they just kind of like, you know, they just kept chiseling
Yeah.
away at the public perception, until now. Like, I don't think people would think a diagnosis of autism is even potentially negative.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. I understand what you mean. I understand what you mean.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I
So
mean, yeah. Okay. The only thing that I would say is that I just to kind of maybe show more why I believe that I have this psychopathic issue. We're back to that issue. How there's like these disembodied complexes that are so disembodied. You know, they're not well organized to negotiate and to control behavior. Um, Another example, the worst example for me was that, and I'll relate it to what you're saying. Okay.
mm,
Um, the worst example for me was, I won't say where I was because I want to a little bit camouflage the circumstances, but it's a very, very serious situation. It's the worst thing I've ever done. That I had been drinking coffee, and I think that I never drink coffee. I'm very, very bad reaction to stimulants, and it causes me to really rev up. And I do believe that revving up has a way of more splitting the complexes if you're not integrated, you know, if you have that problem. Um, and I could tell that I could even see myself behaving really weird, you know, like I was almost like yelling and yelling, not at anybody, but just kind of like being like wild, you know. And I was driving a car, and we were driving to somewhere, you know, and it wasn't in the United States, I can say that. And it was in a third world country, but I can tell you, as by way of background, I had always been so irritated at how people in this country have this very passive aggressive way of, when there's high speed cars on highways, they will just slow walk in front of the cars, just kind of not caring about the cars, almost like you're going to put on the brakes, you know, kind of like, it just seemed to me like such a passive aggressive, just idiotic. And I always had this kind of real hostility, tremendous hostility. It really irritated me. But on this day, I wasn't really aware of these things. I was just kind of driving, and I could see in the distance someone who looked like they were drunk in the median of a highway of a. Actually, it was more like, I would say it was more like, not a highway. It was more like a autopista, like, I don't know what you call it, like a I don't know, like a super highway.
hmm
And he was kind of wavering and kind of almost like, it looked like he wanted to get in front of the car. And I was like, you're not gonna, there's no, I mean, you're not gonna walk in front of this car. And I said, you know what? I'm not gonna invest my attention to try to wonder whether you're gonna walk in front of the car.
mm,
So I'm gonna kind of, you know, look at the radio, and I'm just gonna kind of not worry about it. And boom, we hit him.
ah,
And so we were, and just to show, you know, put some color on it, like, I am not so psychopathic that, okay, let's just get out of here. No, I felt terrible. I felt terrible.
mhm,
And I was really shocked. I was shocked. It was shocking because I didn't even see him walk in front of the car. But but when I put that together with the incident with the lizard, and these other things, I do have to wonder, and knowing that I had a history of having this kind of, antipathy to, the behavior of people walking in front of cars and, whatever, I think, in other instances in my life that I don't have time to talk about everything, but I think now I can make a stronger, kind of inference that, there is some disembodied entities that are not integrated enough that I'm having wherewithal to deal with them, because it's fair to be frustrated. It's fair to be irritated, but the entity that was being irritated was kind of disembodied, and it was just kind of like, it wasn't concert operations of my complexes, and that resulted in somebody getting killed. I think, I don't know if he got killed because I wanted to stay, and I was willing to go to jail. I was willing to deal with it and just say, hey, I'll admit to what I have to admit. I felt terrible, but I was with actually a few people, and one of them was a lawyer from this country, and she said, you may think you want to go to jail, but you're not in the United States, and you don't know what you're going to be dealing with in this country. You could be in a terrible situation. You could get either killed or very sick in a jail here. And I recommend that we just get the hell out of here. And I could tell she felt very bad, but also they had that savvy of people in this country where they're kind of almost used to things going really wrong and sometimes having to do really bad things. I was very uncomfortable, and I could tell you that I felt terrible about it for a long time. And it really destroyed the relationship because my brother was with me. He was sitting in the front of the car and he couldn't believe, because he saw the person and he didn't
Oh,
notice that I avoided my gaze, and he had no idea. And when I tried to explain that to him, he said, that just sounds like such a off the wall. That's such an off the wall justification. I don't think I believe you.
mm,
I think you really just hit the guy, and it's like, wow, even my brother, like, we used to have a certain amount of trust, and it really broke all the trust, in that relationship. And even today, the only two things my brother can say is like, hey, at least I didn't touch my sister, and secondly, I didn't smash somebody in a car. It's like, it's kind of like saying, I don't know if I can trust you. Like, I know I can't trust you. Like that
right.
really is an issue. And it really broke the relationship. And so what I'm trying to say is that, I'm all about, trying to understand, what happens in what is really, let's say, classical psychopathy. I'm all about it. But I think in order to earn and deserve the trust of the community, to be open to, receiving psychopaths as fellow people, I think there has to be at least, you have to at least, in exchange for that, offer at least a very honest concession of how dangerous it can be,
Yeah.
how damaging it can be. And you have to really kind of earn the trust, by being fully, I'm fully willing to say that when a young person has disembodied complexes and has that kind of alienation syndrome, or that feeling like, I don't even know who I am, you don't really know the content of your disembodied operators. You know what I mean? You
Hmm.
really don't know, and you really can't really guarantee, how that's going to come out, and how it could really cause harm. And so I think that, I would be willing to admit that as a young person, maybe that's something that's missing from our world, but maybe there should be like boarding schools, very, very special boarding schools. And maybe I could even say that, without supervision, I probably didn't deserve to be fully unsupervised, let's say fully unsupervised in my life. I probably should have had some kind of coaching or counseling or something, because it is just inherently dangerous.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I agree. It's like, why don't we give driver's licenses to 12-year-olds? Like
Yeah.
there's just kind of an assessment to be made where people
Hmm.
think, okay, this person kind of doesn't deserve this level of freedom. And I do kind of agree that it's interesting. We're kind of like a little bit binary. You're either in prison or you're not in prison.
Hmm. Hmm.
And there are like a lot of kind of gradations in between, in which somebody is struggling with something significantly enough that it's
Hmm.
not really a responsible social choice to just allow that person to be treated the exact same.
Yeah.
And actually, it's interesting that we kind of say this, because one of the because I know the law or whatever. So when I'm getting falsely fired for some reason,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
has happened more than once, then I think especially the second time I was like really a lot
Of
smarter
course,
because I
of
had
course,
done it once before.
of course.
That I said, hey, how about this for a special accommodation? If you think that I can't be, with these particular people, doing this particular thing because you don't trust me, then just put it in like an observer, just put up cameras,
Yeah, yeah,
do
yeah,
do whatever. And I think that's kind of a fair thing of, to ask for trade-offs, because I
yeah,
was like, I don't care, I
yeah,
trust myself and or to the extent that if I do a bad thing, I trust that I need to
yeah,
suffer consequences or experience the consequences of that thing.
yeah,
So yeah, that was like one thing that I was willing to kind of do, and I think that
yeah.
surprised them. They were like, "Okay, well, we're not going to do that."
Yeah, I think you fall into a very unusual special case of, really, I think you're a very smart person. And I also think that you may have some extraordinary compensatory extraordinary cognitive compensations that other people just couldn't even come close to. So, it would be so unfair to generalize your situation, but your situation is still very instructive. You know what I
Mm.
mean? Um, but I don't know.
But
I
I
don't know.
agree. I mean, I totally agree. The one thing though that I feel like I should say just a little bit is there are a lot of people that have like as I've mentioned, young people, like a 16-year-old, especially male driver is dangerous.
Oh
They
yeah,
are dangerous. They
yeah,
like statistically kill way more pedestrians or
absolutely.
whatever else, right? But
Yeah.
there's kind of a trade-off. There's like a little bit of I guess, like we have to take our shoes off to get on planes now because,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so it's all kind of this balancing act. And one statistic that I've kind of mentioned before, and it's such a dirty statistic,
Okay,
uh so kind of dirty, total back of the envelope, totally, like manipulating data, but not
okay,
using actual data, but like kind of, I'm sure cherry picking. But that
okay,
if you take two people, and they're genderless and like neither one of them is a psychopath. And you
okay.
make one a psychopath and you make one male,
I got you. I got you.
yeah,
Yeah,
then
I got
actually the male person is more dangerous than the
you. Yeah.
psychopath.
Well, I guess, my response to that, having a background in statistics,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit. I'm not going to do that psychopathic thing of showing my little card, like, hey, like pretending to be. No, I'm very little bit, but I would say that I'm not going to even get into genders or into, even necessarily. Well, I would say not even psychopath. I would just say you can identify
Mm-hmm.
subsets of the population where you can expect to see issues regardless of gender. You know
Right.
what I mean? I mean, where I think depending on how you carve the subset, the male factor might become less of a determiner. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Um, so I think that, we have to, I think there are some subsets. I personally, I have an objection to the stereotyped descriptions of personality disorders. I think that what would be a fairer thing to me to say would be if maybe we could do more work on the psychology end, maybe
Yes.
more work, and maybe have a better just just say just identify people that have substantial problems with I'm going to call them unintegrated complexes, okay, like the components of the self, you know and that when you have someone who has like a real, I mean, psychology hasn't evolved to really identify this. I think it's just, oh, he has this behavior pattern. That's too superficial. I
Right.
think you have to really identify something that people can understand. Whoa, that really would cause a problem. You see what I mean? And I don't think there's no indication of the cause. It's just, these patterns, what an assholes, people, I hate people who have those patterns. And now we have this situation where because of that because psychology offers these stereotypes as that's like the end all concept of what is a personality disorder. Now we have people just, it's almost like a pride, it's like bloodlust, oh, that narcissist, and you can hear the way they pronounce the word, it's like this curse, you
Mm-hmm.
see. And I think that if you change the whole paradigm and said, look, you have people who have real issues in the formation of the complex elements that come together to make the concert of experience, and that for us normal people, by the grace of God, we have integrated, very well integrated, very well, kind of, yeah, very well tempered, elements. And so we don't even realize, but other people have very kind of unintegrated, very ungainly. There may be some issues with hyper arousals and stuff. And it really creates kind of like you said, and I'm using your words, funhouse mirrors. And it's not a joke. It's really distortion. And it's also, you do not have wherewithal, and it has to be very carefully emphasized. Yes, very dangerous. Okay. But it's not like bad person, it's problem. And you can see the danger, just like you'd have sympathy for somebody who has, for some reason, when it becomes psychosis, it's all okay, oh yeah, well, it needs a hospital, whatever. But so I think that, you have to, I don't know, like maybe just erase everything and just say, look, we were, well, and I don't expect this to happen, but just to say we were a little bit naive, just like we've been naive about this whole thing about, something about the imbalances, dopamine imbalances causing depression or whatever. Like recently there's research saying the whole theory behind serotonin reuptake inhibitors is completely unfounded. Similarly in the personality disorder, we've been too descriptive and not enough into the root what causes these things, because what we're really getting is just, we're just creating portraits of just unsavory characters as opposed to really explaining what's going on. And then on the same time, you have to give something in exchange. If you want to be taken seriously, you have to also give something, and so the giving would be, look, this is dangerous. We're not going to pretend it's not like, oh, just treat us like people. Like, no, there may be some asterisks to our existence, and we have to, so, I mean, I don't know. And I get frustrated having this conversation because we're just fantasizing, how do you really make that happen? You know what I mean? I personally see, because I deal with my mother. My mother's a psychiatrist, and I feel like the world of psychologists is a cultural world that has its own history, its own, I don't know, its own narcissisms, if you want to say, its own false self, its own true disembodied complexes. And I think it would be very hard. I think psychology would resist the efforts, to, I don't know. So it really, I think, in my opinion, you'd have to see some, off-planet guy like a new Carl Jung just appear and just dazzle the world and just kind of transform, paradigm changing. It would have to be really like that. We're just waiting for a genius who hasn't appeared. Maybe. I mean,
Yeah. I kind of agree, but I also think like, I don't have a background. I didn't have a background in statistics until I became a law professor. And then I wanted to do empirical work because I was like, why are we just talking about what ifs? Let's see what
okay,
actually happens, right?
okay,
And I think that like a lot of psychology, I keep wanting to tell this story of how I was in a anthropology class, music anthropology class, and they
okay.
were trying to ask a question. They're like, "Yeah, we're not sure if like people from this particular culture can perceive these tones." And I was like, "Why don't you just test them?" And
That's
like a
right.
hush fell on the room, and they were like, you can't do that. You can't use human test subjects in anthropology. And I
Oh,
was like,
okay,
just to
wow.
see if they can perceive these tones, we
Yeah,
can't. And
yeah,
then they went into the whole thing like there's a long history of anthropology abusing the human test subjects. And so now we just don't do it
yeah,
at all. And I'm like,
yeah. I
what?
think anytime you see what looks like hyper, what's the word they use, hyper scrupulosity or whatever, I think
Mm.
that's always very suspicious.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
that's
Almost like they
always,
don't want to learn empiricism, where there probably are some diehards that are like, well, we can't introduce empiricism, like actual studies, into this area to validate whether or not what we've been saying for the past 100 years is true. Because what if
mm,
it's not true? Like, I
yeah.
agree with you that there's like, I don't necessarily blame psychology, and say they intentionally did these things. But as
No, no.
we've been kind of talking about, it's just like coincidentally, suspiciously coincidental, you know?
I will be happy when psychology does what any reasonable person will do, when they apply psychoanalysis to psychology itself.
Mm-hmm.
That will satisfy me, because that will show that they're practicing themselves. Because I think the problem with psychology is that you, power corrupts, absolutely. You know, when you have the power, there is there is like an attendant responsibility to deserve the power, you know. And so I think society should demand of people that command things like philosophies, psychologies, to really demonstrate self-analysis as well, you know. So I'm saying that psychology itself should analyze itself. There should be mandatory a self-critiquing, you know, school of psychology or something
Yeah.
like that. It has to be.
But I think, you know, I'm less like we need just like some wunderkind Carl Jung to show up,
Okay.
because I see it. I see trends where, like, especially cross disciplinarians, you know, who are kind of like taking stuff from, you know, they have a perspective not just from psychology, let's say,
Okay.
or any field, you know, and applying it to a different field. You know, like I've seen kind of on Twitter, between Twitter academics, where, you know, so a lot during the pandemic, people would say, stay in your lane, you know, you're not a
Oh yeah.
X, and so therefore don't talk about this.
Yeah.
But there really aren't lanes, you know.
Yeah.
Like anthropology, you know, why don't they use empiricism? You know, like that's not a real thing. But psychology can, you know, but
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, it's
Yeah.
still human test subjects, but you know, it's just kind of weird, like
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
things have kind of historically developed. But I do see some of these arbitrary distinctions breaking down. One, two is, you know, like as I have mentioned before, this is something that I didn't realize until I became what did I say? And on the advisory board for
Okay.
psychopathy is
Okay.
that it's really hard to get research grants,
Oh yeah.
like publicly funded research grants for
Okay.
psychopath research for some reason.
Okay.
For autism, I mean, like,
Okay.
snap, right?
Okay.
For
Yeah.
psychopathy, no. And so, like, part of this is just like, you know, when people are like, when you, even you saying things like psychopathy is so dangerous, then I say, my kind of retort to this is, well,
Okay.
then
Okay.
why aren't we spending more money on it?
Of course. Oh
Yeah.
no. No.
Hmm.
Gosh. No. First of all, well, yeah. Of course. I mean, yeah. Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's.
yeah, it's interesting because it's like, if people love the, who's the one that I don't like, Kent Keel, and I just don't. It's not like I don't like him as a person. I just don't agree with any of his arguments, and I think he
Help
does
me
like,
understand who he is.
he does like the brain scans. He's the brain scan guy. He has a book or something, but
Okay.
he's kind of famous. You can probably look this up, for
Okay.
saying like psychopaths. In one of his articles, academic articles,
Uh-huh.
psychopaths are responsible for like billions of dollars of
Oh yeah.
damages and loss
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
something. And it's totally just back of the envelope, kind of like,
Yeah.
there's no statistical
Yeah.
anything applied to it. And but he's, you know, he comes up with this big number, and I guess my retort is, number one, that's not true, probably,
Okay.
you
Okay.
know, or come up with a better better formula for calculating this. And then
Yeah.
the second thing is, like, if it's such a big deal, then why aren't we like researching, as you say, the root causes? You know, what are,
Yeah.
because it's like just a list of symptoms, and if there's anything we've learned from the pandemic, that a sneeze could be COVID, or
Yeah.
it could be
Yeah.
nothing, or it could be
Yeah.
allergies, or it
That's why, I
could...
mean, I don't know why it's hard for other people. Like, I'm not fooled by how we dress our society. We dress our society kind of like in figurative tuxedos and elegant, you know, we appear so elegant, and it's really impressive. You know, the smartest of us are so impressive, but I think really in the underlying primordial level, that's really kind of like the base of our fancy society. I think we're very, very primitive,
Hmm.
you know. And I think there's a lot of tremendous sloppiness. I mean, tremendous sloppiness, and even kind of almost like despicable, just really crude, you know, just I don't know, just really just real imprecision and malice, tremendous malice.
Hmm.
And so I just like, I'm not really fooled by the veneer, because you can too easily see what's underneath it, or at least I can, you
Yeah.
know. And so that's what we're dealing with, you know. Another thing that I have to say is that I'm kind of astounded at how, I don't know, I would almost say kind of like rudimentary and really just kind of like random, and just I think the way you see, you know, psychotherapy today, you know, the modalities of treatment and stuff, like, I don't know, I guess I find it all real superficial. I
Yeah.
don't know. I think psychologists are almost like brainwashed to believe that just by having a magical conversation,
Mm.
you know, there's going to be just these magical things happening with people. I think I don't know. Something tells me that, first of all, I think you need to get better into the foundations about what's really happening with people. And then, you know, the witchcraft or the shamanism of actually dealing with it, you know, I'm not saying it's magic at all, but I'm saying it might be pretty, what might have to happen with people to really work with their issues might be really grueling, and might really involve a lot of like tremendous efforts, and really like it's not just went to, great conversation for an hour, and now it's just kind of percolating in me, the magic that I received, and and I'm just getting better because I'm going and talking to somebody. I think that, I don't know, something smacks to me that is kind of almost like magic. It's kind of like a con, you know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah, I think like psychology, like Freud was so well accepted, like this is absolute truth, and now he's not. I just feel like something similar is going to happen in this situation where we're not
Okay.
going to think that like the reason why this happened or something with people is like anal retentiveness because when they were
Okay.
whatever
Okay. Okay.
stop yeah, but or maybe not. Yeah, so I agree with you. I guess I'm more hopeful or
Well,
optimistic,
no,
but I
I want to be
also,
hopeful too.
yes, I think
I
it's
want to be.
a really good point that you're making though, is that like why do I feel no shame about this is
Okay.
because these are my beliefs, is that it's all just like a little unsteady,
Okay.
as you say,
Okay.
sloppy,
Okay.
that normal people are kind of like, up to shenanigans. That I'm kind of like, aren't we just two sides of the same coin? You're doing this bad thing for this reason, I'm doing it for that reason. Like we're both hopefully, for a functional society, trying to stop doing bad things and do
Oh
more
yeah.
good things, right?
Yeah. Also, like another thing I wanted to say, and this, I'm so glad because I almost didn't say it, and I'm sure this can't be an infinite conversation, but I almost forgot something that I thought was so important, and I just think that the even if you are tremendously perfectly related socially with people, and I don't even want to use the word social, I want to use the word, if you're just very well interrelated with people in the interpersonal space, and even if you're considered just a wonderful person, and you are a wonderful person and everything's great in the world of people, okay, that doesn't mean that humans as an aggregate don't have tremendous issues of alienation with regard to, let's say, the environment, or let's say
Mm-hmm.
with regard to things that are outside the human sphere.
Right.
You see, and I don't even think we can begin to estimate. I think if we tried to estimate, we'd probably underestimate just how, I would say, how staggeringly alienated we are as a society of humans in our humanness, how terribly alienated we are. And even I think we have to explore that. Like I really believe, like I take seriously, when I read, like, say, the first part of the Bible, I see just a break from the forest, a break from nature, and I have to say that breaks don't just happen. In the story, it appears to just happen, but I think to have a break like that, there has to be a kind of a revulsion. There has to be like an antipathy, something that really pushes you away, and like to me, the most capsulizing symbol of that is how we conceive of soil, soiled. And it's funny because the root of the word soil is really what we get the word human.
Mm.
And at the same time, something is soiled. It's almost on the level of like like crap. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Almost on the level. And so I think there's this revulsion. And I mean, I'm not saying we should pretend that we suddenly don't have. I think we should embrace our revulsions. If that's really part of what got us out of like the forests or whatever, and that maybe the birth of agrarian humans. But it comes with problems,
Yeah.
because if we just look at the soil as this filthy thing that we might have to till it, to make our crops grow. But there comes a time when you realize that soil is probably like the most like foundational biological organism. It's like a composite organism, and then it's not just dirt. Dirt is not soil. Soil is a tremendously delicate, complex biosphere, or whatever, I don't know what you want to call it, but it's tremendous interplay of funguses and bacteria, and it's so essential. And even when say, oh well, we'll just plant some more trees, but so glib. I mean, that's psychopathic. You see that glibness. Oh, just plant some trees, maybe some more electric cars. Yeah, we could still grow the population. Just kind of like, are you really, really properly, weighing these issues, or even the doubts that we might have, about what it means to be occupying, so much, how many cows have, or how much pasture land has to be for every million people. I mean, it's just, it's, you know, to me, it's just glibness, just really, just, it's just psychopathy applied to whatever's in our alienated space. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I think that, you know, honestly, I think that if there ever comes an enlightenment, you know, it will be that even in the most normal, in the most healthy, in the most human, humanitarian, perfect, we will see the staggering, despicable, maybe, or just staggering, dangerous, you know, alienations that really, really affect our basic relationship with, I would say, you know, the ground of biological being, you know, almost like it's, and that could be scary, you know. Um, and so I don't know, like I would never try to say, well, we should try to love soil. Maybe we should try to totally embrace and totally understand the antipathies and the revulsions, and at the same time appreciate that at the same time I'm disgusted by this, but at the same time it's so important. And then make yourself learn to have like maybe everybody should learn, you know, as a practice, almost like a spiritual practice, you should learn how to make what do they call it, compost, you know,
Yeah.
like real compost. But I also want to say, and never take away the doubt that even if we have all the compost making in the world, I should have a doubt that there has to be a difference between a 500-year-old virgin forest that has maybe 17 feet of topsoil, or I don't know, I just made that up, it might be 11 feet,
Hmm.
versus, you know, us planting trees, you know, because it might take centuries, you know, to, and then what if when we plant trees, we're imposing artificial, you know, kind of like, you don't have the right diversities, you know what I mean? Like, I remember, you know, somebody was saying that part of the problem in California, a lot of the deforestation was because, you know, just being very glib and very casual about, you know, bringing trees from other parts of the world into California. And then these viruses came and just
Mm.
destroyed a ton of trees in California. You know, that's in addition to all the deforestation, you know, from construction and, you know, whatever. And so I'm just thinking, like, we're so uncareful, you know, and you, it, all you have to be is just uncareful. You don't even have to be intentionally destructive, you know.
Yeah,
It's,
malicious.
yeah,
Right.
just uncareful is enough, just with our population. And also, like, you know, I'm sorry, but it's not just agro industry. I mean, agro industry is terrible, but even just tilling the soil is tremendously destructive. And, you know, so I think of, like, you know, that part of, I don't know if it was Isaiah, you know, they'll turn the swords into plowshares. And I'm thinking, okay, well, you know, even the plowshares are pretty, pretty scary, you know, even the symbol of peace, you know. So I think we have to understand that even our symbols of peace and our symbols of, like, the highest holiness, you know, in human being, you know, we may still have tremendous psychopathy collectively. So I think that, you know, the psychopathic predicament is something that I think we all have to learn to see how we participate in it.
Mm,
You
that's
know,
interesting.
you know. So I don't know, you know, to me, there's nothing more spiritual than, you know, compost. But do not have compost and tell yourself that you're doing great things. I think it's just a symbol, you know, take it only as a symbol, as a way of relating to something that might be underappreciated. But make no mistake, you know, I personally have a tremendous question, because you know, somehow I was thinking, like, you know, when you think of all the topsoil and the way the topsoil forms in multi-century virgin forests, topsoil is like a sponge. It holds tremendous amounts of water. So they're
Mm.
like the equivalent of lakes, like vast lakes that don't exist,
Yeah.
because they're not in the form of a lake where you can see it. It's what's in the sponge of the soil. And so much tremendous amount of bodies of water that are now essentially desertified. You see what I mean?
Right.
That's scary. I mean, I think, you know, I'm not going to say I know the impact of this, like this will cause this. I'm not, don't even get, just having a question about it. And the fact that we're glib about the question, you see, that's what makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Like really good food for thought. I always try to help people to kind of connect to psychopathy if they're not connected to it, or help psychopaths connect to other things if they're not connected to it. And this is like a great example of which people can kind of maybe see, like I think you're right. Even if we're connected to humans, are we connected to animals? Vegans would probably say no. If
Yeah.
we're like, how could you guys, like kill octopuses, right? They're too smart to be killed and eaten
Mhm.
or whatever else. So I think these questions are really good food for thought. Well, we have been chatting for a while. Is there anything else you would like to, that you've been thinking, oh, I need to talk about this before we end?
Um, I don't know. I guess I would just like to know, like, if you had to invest like your hopes in maybe two or three things that could change right now in the academic, political, pop cultural, what are two or three things that you think would kind of increment, towards what you think would be a better place for, destigmatizing personality disorders?
For personality disorders, so I think that I talked to a journalist recently, right? And she told me that there's like a TikTok craze about like psychopathy tests. Like, are you a psychopath? Here's a quick test or something. And then she sent me a couple, she said it's like viral or whatever. I don't know what her definition of viral is. And then she asked me, why do you think it's gone viral? And I kind of said, well, I think it's like the same kind of reason why anything goes viral is there have to be, it cannot be so common that it's that people have already experienced it, I guess. They
Oh yeah,
already have the
it's kind of like
antibodies.
everybody is so obsessed with Ted Bundy, like so fascinating. Is that because maybe we all, in a weird way, kind of relate to him in a very, very unconscious way, or
You think that's why?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I think people are fascinated, besides also being terrified.
Well,
You know.
yeah. So I kind of said, I think it's just because it's probably not spoken of that often. And it's kind of a
Okay.
weird
Okay.
thing.
Okay. Okay.
It's like
Okay.
any kind of weird natural phenomenon or historical where you're like, hold
Okay.
it, what
Okay.
happened?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
it has to be like not talked about enough that when it does get talked about, people are like, I feel to share this because this is crazy. Guys, did you know
Okay.
that this
Okay.
happens? That was
Okay.
my theory,
Okay.
so
Okay. No. No. Yeah. Yeah. I think that sometimes I'm off the wall. Yeah.
no, 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 no.
No,
I mean,
I can be off the wall. I can be really off the wall.
but it
Yeah.
is true. Like, why are people obsessed with like Ted Bundy? Why are people, why does this kind of interest and engage them? But I think when they go to then look for answers, I don't think they're like very good answers. And I hope that as people kind of continue to look for answers and maybe don't see exactly what they're looking for, that they'll push for answers. I hope that
Okay.
that is something that will happen. So
But
I
I
don't
mean,
know,
I
like,
was just trying to think if you could think of maybe two or three, or maybe just one or two, just concrete things that
yeah,
you could see
well, that
as
would be
like
one of them is
advancing.
that people
Okay.
just being like, hey, why aren't there better answers to this?
Okay. Okay.
Why isn't there like because people are like, what's the difference between sociopath and psychopath and antisocial personality
Okay.
disorder? And
Okay.
like, is there a consensus? No, there's not, and why
Um,
isn't there? Like, you
okay.
guys can't even just figure out what term to call it, and you're trying to
Okay.
get us
Okay.
to and I just think so I think that like in general like we're kind of in a swing of holding people accountable,
Okay.
like Me Too and everything else. So I'm
Okay.
hoping that eventually people will come to psychopathy. I do think of another big change, so that's one of them. I'll give you a
Okay.
second
Okay.
one,
Okay.
is people like you coming forward and like sharing your experiences, and people like can either identify or not identify with something that you've said, but it's at least now they've been exposed to it, right? Now
Okay.
they've
Okay.
gotten kind of a
Okay.
different perspective about what's happening.
Yeah.
So I
And
think
I'll. Okay. Okay.
same thing
Yeah.
with autism. It used to be that you didn't know anybody with autism, or it used to be that you didn't know anyone who was non-binary gender,
Okay. Okay.
and as it kind of gets a little bit more familiar, then I think the stigma is going to kind of naturally shed a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll just add one final thing. Like I was horrified by Ted Bundy. I mean, I was horrified, and I was
Hmm.
even horrified. I mean, I'm being honest. Even if my feelings are unfair, I'm just being honest. Okay, I was horrified watching him be interviewed. Like the night before he was executed, and it wasn't just I was horrified at him. I was horrified at the whole spectacle of it. Here's this guy who's about to be put to death, and it's kind of like adding to his torture. He's going to now be intimately interviewed in what looks like a very confessional, and it's right before he gets his head shaved and he's going to be put in an electric chair. It's like, wow. It's like, it's really, and then you have all these proto Trump supporters out like decades before Trump having like a Trump rally outside, the Stark prison near, I think it's near Gainesville or something. But but just this whole spectacle, and it's like, yeah, Fry, it's just like celebrating. And then then the hearse comes with his dead body through the crowd. It just kind of like, my God, I mean, this is like, wow, the whole thing. I mean, but I was also horrified by him, and just the clearness of his eyes, just how he seemed to be so earnest but empty. And it was only until I looked at my own personal and really had to look. I mean, it took me decades, to even make sense of it, and I'm not even, maybe there's a lot that I haven't made sense of yet, but to even maybe come to the idea that it wasn't just, let's say, a lack of feelings that caused his problems. Okay. There was a whole cluster of very complex sexual issues, very complex issues with women, with maybe obsessive, weird, things that if they had been integrated, they
Mm.
could have negotiated to cause a wherewithal that could have put him more on the level of, let's say, a fetishist, or I don't even know, somebody who wouldn't have gone that far. And so it's not just a lack of feelings, it's a whole kind of a constellation of kind of disembodied, I would say, like disembodied complexes that really are not intercommunicating, to cause what a very dangerous situation. You know what I mean? But at least when you see it in a different way, it's not, oh, bad person.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, this guy is really crazy. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I think, I don't know, it's like somehow we've come to a point like way in the 19th century, what we would now call psychopathy, they would sometimes say criminally insane. And sometimes I think we'd almost be better off if we just stayed there, because that was actually kind of a pretty honest place to start. And somehow we kind of morphed it into these bad people. I don't know. I mean, I, but I'm just saying that, it took me a hell of a long time to come to a place where I could even somehow have an attempt at understanding somebody that even I felt was, kind of like horrific, and so it's like, I don't know. I mean, it's just an example, but
Yeah. Real quick question. Did you did you think you were psychopathic before you saw the Ted Bundy stuff, before you were
you
exposed to
know,
that?
I'll be honest with you. I think that during high school and stuff, I think I didn't have words for it, but I think I felt like I was notably alienated from ordinary experience,
Mm.
and that I didn't see how it could cause problems, but I could see definitely how I was kind of disconnected. And I did get a diagnosis when I was 18 of a narcissistic personality disorder. I took it with a grain of salt. I thought, well, if a doctor thinks that, there has to be something going on, but I didn't necessarily agree that that was necessarily it. And I think over time, maybe in my 20s, I kind of never really let myself say the word psychopath, but I think I kind of wondered if I was a little bit antisocial,
Yeah.
without going too deep.
That's interesting. I often wonder with doctors, like if they were kind of on the fence, like this doctor may have thought, hey, it's safer to say
Yeah, yeah.
narcissistic.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, and
Because
frankly,
they're
yeah,
normal people, or presidents of the United States maybe, who
absolutely.
have been narcissistic. Yeah, but if to
Yeah.
say somebody's antisocial personality disorder is like trash,
No, you're right. Yeah,
suddenly,
yeah.
yeah,
Major
suddenly you have to
consequence.
go to jail if you do something. You
Yeah,
can't be
yeah.
diverted.
No, I don't doubt that at all. But honest to God, I think I had a very vague sense myself, and even the diagnosis on paper, which I interpreted more broadly, I interpreted it as this guy saying I have a problem. You
Yeah,
know what I mean?
right,
And I
exactly.
think I had a very vague sense of really appreciating what was really going on, beyond just feeling kind of alienated. I think that's probably the case for a lot of people who have this issue. They probably just have a vague sense that they're just kind of detached from reality. Beyond that, it's just kind of vague, and they may just even feel like, I'm always getting into trouble, but now I'm going to really try to avoid it, and things just kind of keep happening. And I think it's kind of rare to find someone who really sees it, and I also assume that I'm probably still just in a process of seeing it, this, you know.
Well, thanks so much for sharing your experience. I hope that somebody listening to you can see themselves in some of the stories that you've said, and hopefully understand themselves a little bit better. So I really
Yeah,
appreciate you coming and talking. It's been super insightful. You've brought up a lot of interesting things that I'm going to keep thinking about, and hopefully we'll get you back on.
yeah, I would really appreciate it. And I really, I can't even tell you how much I appreciate what you're doing. It's not clear to me exactly what the domino effects will be, but I just kind of just vaguely I don't know, just kind of viscerally just feel really appreciative for what you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate
And
that.
I also feel like it's so important when you use the word psychopathic adjacent, because that might be one of the first increments to kind of break it out of the, you know what I mean? Kind of
Mm-hmm.
slightly generalize it a little more, So I think, because I think a lot of people have kind of, kind of, I think it's actually rare to find people who are just totally integrated, So I think in the spectrum, you cut right into normality and normal people, So
I
if
agree.
be presented a certain way where people are gonna, I don't know, just, yeah. But anyway, so yeah, I really appreciate it. Yeah, I was really appreciate it, and I really appreciate what you're doing. And I have to just add the one thing, I do personally think you're a good person. I don't know if I'm right. I don't know if I'm right, but I am very careful about ascribing that, And so for me to even think that, that's unusual for me. You know what I mean? So I have to add that. Now, and it may not be healthy for me to say that, because I don't know, you might have an issue about being told, but it's a feeling I have. And so take it that way,
Yeah, I'll take it that way.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Talk to you later.